Hello again. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess and this is my ADHD lifestyle, and today I want to talk about being a remedial student in school. And yes, this is a video essay. I'm doing those now. If you enjoy this video, please consider liking it. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. And if you really love my content, please consider hitting the bell icon so you get notified every single time that I post. So this is going to be a little bit different than what I normally do because I am going to try and do this like vaguely video essay style. And just to say, like, video essays really inspire me. My favorite YouTubers on YouTube are video essayists, so this is kind of like an exciting thing for me, so I hope you guys like it too. As I said at the beginning of this video, I kind of want to talk about being a remedial student in school. Something I think that's talked about a lot in online spaces is being a gifted kid or a former gifted kid. So there's a lot of videos as well as like just general like hot takes on Twitter about it, and I think the first time I kind of saw this was quite a few years ago on Tumblr, where people started kind of talking about it as being like formerly gifted kids and like how that affected them. I want to say too, like a lot of people who have ADHD, I've seen a lot of them talk about being former gifted kids, just talking about the ways that being a former gifted kid who had undiagnosed ADHD or even had ADHD that was diagnosed, like affected them and affected them through their adulthood. I am not one of those kids. And I'm just going to say right now that the point of this video is not to invalidate any of those experiences. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we all had very different experiences growing up. This video is not to invalidate any experiences that people had being in gifted kid programs. This is not to say that that couldn't have been highly influential on their life, whether they feel that they were once a gifted kid, now they're a very anxious adult. That's like kind of the one I hear a lot. I would just really like to represent the other side of the spectrum, and that's kind of what I wanted to do this essay about, which is being a remedial student. If you're looking for a video about being a gifted kid, if that's something that you're kind of looking out for, I would highly suggest watching Tiffany Ferg's video on this after you watch this one, of course. And I say that because, wow, do we need to talk about some of the bad hot takes that former gifted kids have been making online in the last couple of weeks, days, months, years maybe? I've seen former gifted kids talking about their experiences, which is not really my issue, but they've been talking about it in a way that's very, very dismissive of kind of everyone else in the conversation, especially, in my opinion, remedial kids. So this is kind of why I'm saying this at the beginning of this video, and that maybe you should consider watching this, because it might give you some perspective into what it was like for everyone else who was kind of not in those gifted programs. Because some of those comments I've seen made on Twitter are just very yikes. But anyway, being a remedial student myself, I am going to speak largely from my own experiences. This essay is going to focus more on my experiences as a remedial student and less on any kind of like fighting between gifted kids or remedial kids. I'll touch on that a little bit, but you'll see how I talk about it later. Hopefully you'll understand where I'm coming from. Just to give you a little bit of background, I grew up outside of Chicago in a suburb, so I was in the Midwest of the United States. I went to a public school. My school district was fairly well off. They were tax funded, meaning that the taxes from the people who lived in the town paid for the schools in the town, but that's not necessarily the case everywhere you go. I feel like being someone who lived in the suburbs and then moved into Chicago, like, I'm very, very aware that like CPS, so Chicago Public Schools, were a very different situation for a lot of students. I'm just putting it all out there. Like, I know I'm coming from a certain place of privilege with some of this. Personally, I was primarily in reading and math remedial courses, and largely in elementary school, so that's like kind of where I'm going to focus. Mostly because by the time I was in middle school, we had like, you know, like you switch into the classes where instead of you're in one classroom all day with the same teacher getting taught all of your subjects, you move into, you're going from classroom to classroom with different teachers who are kind of focused on specific subjects. And by the time we were there, the divide didn't feel as clear. But also in my district, middle school is really where gifted kind of went away, and that's when you started seeing honors instead. I must also say at this point, this essay itself isn't going to be a ton about ADHD, but I will say that a lot of my experiences were colored by the fact that I did have undiagnosed ADHD. Also, I do have dyslexia, which my family did know about, but I didn't have an IEP, and I don't really know if my school knew about it. Yeah, that's really all I have on that. I just don't really know. Like, I know I was in a remedial reading and writing program, but it was mostly focused on reading, and I don't know if there was any specific like conversations with my parents about the fact that I had dyslexia. My parents were pretty firm from when I was very young that I had it. I'm also going to try and talk a little bit about transitioning out of being a remedial student because that is something that happened to me, and I want to kind of talk about what that looks like. Yeah, so that's my whole intro before I start. Sorry, that was kind of a lot. My last thing before I get into more specific stuff is I want to talk about the difference between being a remedial student and being a special education student. I don't know why I'm doing air quotes. These are real things. So as far as how it worked in my district, we had kind of 4 levels in elementary school. And like I said, I'm going to be primarily talking about that. At the top, there were the gifted students, and then there were the average students, so students who were not excelling but also were not falling behind. There were the remedial students who were considered to be below average and therefore falling behind. And then there was special education. So I just wanted to clarify that. Sometimes people use remedial to refer to just that average level, so someone who was not gifted and was not in special education. That was not how it was in my school districts, and I actually talked to a friend who went to a different elementary school in the same district who edits my videos. Hi, Molly. Talked to her a little bit, and she confirmed that there was like an average, and then there was remedial. Remedial was considered below that. Special education, on the other hand, was for students who had a special need. What does that mean? Very good question. I honestly don't know. Thinking back on it, I spent a lot of time when I was writing this script and this essay thinking about the fact that I don't clearly remember there being any special education students in my school, and I think part of the reason for that was my district sent them to a specific school. Like, they had their own building. They were integrated in middle school so that they could get the attention and the care that they needed. It just, I think, depended on the student and the case and what they were dealing with. So unfortunately, I don't have like a lot of information about how that worked, but typically someone who was special needs or special education in my school district was someone who had like cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or something in like that vein. So unfortunately, in my experience, it's kind of one big like shrug emoji. I just don't really know what was going on there, partially because I was a very small child and I don't really have the opportunity to like go back and talk with teachers and figure out how it worked. That all, aside, I from here on kind of want to talk about just the effects of being a remedial student on me as an adult and where those effects came from and why they are the way they are. So I didn't really understand that I was a remedial student when I was in these programs. I just knew that I was in a special program and I knew it was negative. I'm going to kind of categorize these different things, and I'm going to start with kind of the social aspects of that because I feel like that was the one that was most pervasive in shaping things that are going on with me now as an adult. Like I said, elementary school is where the largest amount of separation happened, or at least it was where the most visible separation happened. And so like from a student perspective, let's start there. Let's start with social. There's a distinct lack of privacy that comes with being a remedial student, at least a remedial student in my school district where I went to school. You'd think, like, initially hearing that, well, they didn't want you to feel ashamed, right? And it's like, well, maybe nobody was actually thinking that as I said it. Anyway, the thing is at my elementary school is students were pulled away from their classes for gifted classes and for remedial courses. They were taken to separate classrooms for this. We had 3 classes in every grade in my elementary school. A teacher would come to like the door of each classroom and pick up the students that they were taking for the gifted classes or for the remedial courses, which this is a mild aside, it's not in the script at all. I was talking to my editor about this, like I said, because we went to the same school district, but we went to different elementary schools. And we both have distinct like memories of like the gifted students class being like on the 2nd floor in like a real like true classroom environment with desks and like things on the walls and stuff. Whereas like our remedial classes were in what felt like a closet. Some of that could just be that a lot of our school buildings were rather old and so they kind of had to fit things. But that was just like a weird thing that we talked about when I was like working on this. But yeah, so they pick the students up, bring us to our extra lessons or, to our little group thing about students who have divorced parents, and yes, we did have a breakout group for students whose parents had divorced, which was probably a good thing, looking back on it. I was not in that. Just for clarification, my parents are still together, and that was like probably the only group that they did a pretty decent job of being private about. Whereas like the gifted kids were pulled out and it was this big special thing, and the remedial kids were pulled out and it was like this hush hush, okay guys, head along kind of thing. I don't think this was nearly as much of an issue for the gifted students, because they were usually being praised in class for their work. Sometimes they would even give like presentations to like the regular classes. They would go off, do their gifted class, and then they would have to come and present what they did in that class to us, which is super weird. The reason the lack of privacy was a problem with remedial students, and I think would continue to be a problem to this day if they are not being better about it, and I know this because like of how I personally felt about it, everyone in my class knew that I was in a remedial course, and that was absolute hell. I don't know why they thought that students, especially very young students, could handle that without being talked to about it, and they were not. Like, we had no conversations about being in a lower course. Like, for us, as the remedial students, we had no conversations about it. There was no, like, psychological, like, hey, are you guys doing okay? Are the other students treating you okay? Kind of stuff. And it was funny because, like, my district was obsessed with bullying, but they were just, like, very bad at actually stopping it. But yeah, so that brings me, obviously, to why it was hell, which is bullying. So I was bullied pretty viciously from the time I was very young. I entered the remedial program in first grade, and that was really when it started. And this happened to other students in the program as well, but at least for the first year that I was in it, I was actually either the only student or one of two students that were being pulled out for these extra courses. We were easy to single out. It was easy to figure out who was in the remedial program, and it was, like I said, treated by the adults around us as a negative thing, which meant that the students around us treated it as a negative thing. This brings me to like the first thing I really want to particularly call out about the whole gifted student thing, and part of the reason I get so personally frustrated when I see like hot takes about gifted students online. The gifted kids in my classes were the worst bullies to the remedial students. And obviously this is not a rule. I did have friends who were in the gifted student program at my elementary school and my middle school and my high school. But the majority of bullying I faced in elementary school actually came from the students that were in the gifted student program, who had kind of gotten a superiority complex from being told they were gifted. Yeah, which I'm not blaming them for. I just want to clarify that. But also it should be said that tracking students in school in general can create an incredibly toxic environment for a lot of different reasons. I felt a need to say this piece, but also because a lot of what you do as a kid is mirror what the adults around you are doing. And I know that for a lot of gifted kids, they might have mirrored what adults were doing towards the remedial students. And I think that's something that you really need to think about. And I'm not like addressing like you need to think about, I mean people in general need to think about. And it like ultimately what it really comes down to is it really is the adults in our life's fault. And I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that it's not. Anyway, yeah, so I was bullied by students who were in the gifted program. I was also bullied by students who were in the average level program. When it really came down to it, you know, sometimes the gifted kids would bully the average kids, and then the average kids would bully the remedial kids because the average kids couldn't beat out the gifted kids. And so it just kind of tracking in elementary school, I feel like, especially without talking to students about it and giving them some kind of framing device and understanding, is bad. That's my hot take of this entire essay. Anyway, the thing about like the toxic environment as like getting labeled average or getting labeled remedial or getting labeled gifted is that it does cause a lot of average students to effectively lash out at anyone to help make themselves feel a little bit more special if they like, you know, aren't in the gifted program and they aren't remedial, they're not getting pulled out for special courses. They don't understand why because teachers aren't telling them why students are getting pulled out for extra courses. Yeah, the adults around us, they were the problem. So this was a huge problem in my elementary school, and I personally responded to it by lying to make myself seem more interesting because in my head, I wasn't one of the smart kids. I didn't want to be one of the dumb kids. I wasn't artistic. I wasn't a good musician. I literally had nothing. And of course, at the time, I didn't know, but this turned out to actually be a very large wealth of creativity that I didn't know I had. I was a bad reader, so no one thought that maybe I would be a good writer. And look at me now. I write marketing content for the IT industry. All jokes aside, as far as I knew when I was a kid, I didn't have a way to stand on equal footing with my peers, so I made things up. That was how I handled it. And this kind of bleeds into what I want to talk about next, which is teachers. Now, I should preface this by saying that being a teacher is a largely thankless and very, very difficult job. But also, come on, I was in 2nd grade. You really did not need to demean me in front of my entire class for not getting a math problem right. Seriously though, while I have fairly fond memories of a lot of my teachers, nearly every single one of them did something like this to me in front of my class. 1st grade, I'd written a little book and I misspelled a word in it. It happened to be one of our spelling words, so I got yelled at in front of the class for misspelling it. 2nd grade, math problem I just mentioned. 3rd grade called me out for not being able to finish my times tables by the end of the year in front of the other students. 4th, frequently told me in front of other students I was doing long division wrong, and at this point I was never going to ever do it right. 5th grade, I can't actually think of one for 5th grade, so good job, 5th grade teacher. In 7th grade, I had a teacher openly talk about the fact that I had dropped from an upper level math course back into a remedial course in front of my homeroom. In 8th grade, I had a teacher actively refuse to suggest me for an upper level math course going into my freshman year of high school, despite the fact that he had been giving me advanced work throughout most of the school year, literally more than half, and felt the need to talk about it in front of my entire class and tell me that I shouldn't be going into that upper level math course in front of them. This continued well into my high school experience, which is why I feel like it's important to talk about resourcing and teacher support when you talk about remedial students. Not only did my teachers frequently belittle me in front of my classmates, other teachers, other staff members, even when I was asking for more or I was trying to advocate for myself. Remember when I said I was going to talk about transitioning out of being a remedial student? Now, by the time I was trying to transition into regular level or advanced level courses like honors, by the time I was in 6th grade, I was doing significantly better in my classes. I think because it was segmented and blocked, it was easier for me to be okay, I'm learning this now. Whereas when I was in elementary school, when we would transition from, say, English to math, it wasn't so clear and it wasn't very finite, so it was harder for my brain to get into that place. So I think it was just honestly a better environment for me to learn in, and I don't think it was that my teachers were better or anything like that. However, this is where I started to run into the largest issue, which I have mentioned at this point, was the lack of support, even when I was asking for more, when I was asking for more of a challenge or trying to do better. As a 6th grader, I did well enough in a math class with a good teacher that I was moved from a remedial class to what was considered a regular class. I was put into a course with a new teacher, literally fresh out of college. There were a lot of students in this class, and honestly, my teacher just could not handle it. She was too new. The students that were together were just too rambunctious, and she just couldn't keep control of things, and it made it very difficult for me to learn in that environment. And eventually, I was moved into a remedial class, but it was so boring. I was so bored the whole time I was in this class. I cannot even begin to tell you. So I coasted through this class. It was far too easy for me, and I probably would have been better off with a different teacher in the upper level course rather than ending up in that lower level course. Schools don't really have that kind of nuance. That course was really where my climb kind of started as far as trying to claw my way out of remedial courses. So in 7th grade, I started to ask to be moved into honors English. I really don't have an explanation for why I didn't get into it, other than the fact that that class was already very crowded. There was only one honors class in my grade for English, and there were almost 30 students in it already. However, it wasn't until 8th grade that I had a teacher tell me they thought I was good enough to go into an upper level course. Yes, I want to clarify. My 6th grade teacher did suggest I go into that upper level math course. However, she never like talked to me about that. She just suggested it for me. So I didn't really think anything of it. I actually for a little bit thought that was the normal track that I would have been on. It turns out it wouldn't. I would have gone from that like lower level math course in 6th to the lower level math course that I wound up in 7th. That was different. She didn't tell me about that. That was just kind of like I wound up on a different track and I didn't even know it. However, in 8th grade, this is actually kind of a bit of a funny story. A teacher that I actually really struggled to get along with, arguably like probably did not like me, and reasonably it was because I was a little shit. There was a situation where we kind of got into this argument about something like an assignment, and I had done something very salty and petty. In response, we had these like journals, and I like wrote a poll in my journal and had a bunch of people respond to it, like from my classmates and stuff, and then just like turned it in without telling her. But she pulled me after class because of this, and she actually sat me down and she said, I think you're really good at English, and I want to suggest you for honors English in high school. And like I think she also kind of was like, I want to make sure that you're mature enough for this, because I was doing that like sassy, salty thing. But that was the only time I was told by a teacher in pretty much my entire educational career that I deserved to go into an upper level course. And I had such whiplash over it. I obviously said yes to her, and that like I really want to go in honors, and kind of like left it at that, and did feel like she did a good job of thoroughly shaming me without like lecturing me. That was clever on her part. In a lot of ways, I really don't think I would be where I am today if she had not done that. There wasn't really a lot of way for me to get into an honors course without that suggestion, which I mentioned that in 8th grade, my math teacher refused to put me in an upper level math course. That also prevented me from taking an upper level science course that I really wanted to take. The fact that my English teacher was the one who believed in me is probably a lot of the reason that I found a lot of passion for English and ultimately writing, and like wound up going to school for it. Yeah, and like I just really have to say, I really didn't understand this until like years later. Like I had the conversation with her, I walked away from it, I went through all of high school, and I think in college at some point I broke down crying because it occurred to me that I would not have been in school doing what I was doing if it was not for that specific teacher. And also it was a realization that she was pretty much the only one that ever told me that I was going to be good at something, which sucks. That's, yeah, kind of going along with like the abuse that sometimes remedial students face at the hands of teachers and students. I kind of want to delve a little bit into the ultimate psychological effects of me having been a remedial student. I want to say right now, if you're a remedial student and you've never told anyone that, or you feel like ashamed for it, I hope that this video gives you a little bit of solidarity and understanding that like we are out there. There are probably more people that were in remedial programs at some point in their education than you probably realize. Don't be ashamed to say that. Like, I feel like that's one of the biggest differences between the gifted kid or like the former gifted kid conversation and like the remedial conversation. Is there's way more people talking about the fact that they were a gifted kid once because it was super, super positive for them. Sorry, when I say it was super positive for them, I mean like the adults around them treated it positively, and for remedial students, I feel like the adults around them treated it negatively, and therefore we don't talk about it. We feel that shame, and so I hope you guys do kind of see where I'm coming from and, you know, understand that, you know, there might be more of us out there and maybe we should talk about it because it might be better for us all. Anyway, so going on to the psychological effects. I didn't really start admitting to the fact that I was in a remedial program at any point in my education and telling people I had been in one until I was in late high school or college. I certainly didn't start calling it remedial until long after college. And I think it really was like the gifted kid conversation that made me go, wow, I was a remedial student. Which sounds a little bit weird. It was what sparked that thought process in my head and really made me realize just how bad all of that was, like all of the tracking that went on. So yeah, it wasn't until long after college that I started calling myself like a former remedial student, or like thinking about this as like I had been in remedial classes. For a very long time in my brain, it was just like those extra courses I took. It literally was after I was finished with my formal education. But anyway, some of the things that I do want to talk about as far as like referring to the psychological impact of being a former remedial kid is that it was colored by the fact that I had undiagnosed ADHD, and that like will always be prevalent in my story. I think these could go generally for anyone who's in a remedial program who does have ADHD or does not. So this was actually also something that came up very heavily in my diagnosis process, was the fact that I was in these remedial programs, and which if you want to hear more about that, I'll link the video above. I had a ton of self-esteem issues from a very young age tied to the fact that I was a remedial student. It took me a very long time, like I said, to admit to being one at all, and I would honestly try to lie my way around being a remedial student and actively tried to avoid talking about opportunities that I did not receive because I was not a gifted student nor an average student. For example, I distinctly remember having a lot of resentment towards the National Honor Society in high school. A lot of my friends had gotten into it. A lot of the people who bullied me in high school were in it, actually. Which is funny because I'm pretty sure like one of their pillars is like respect or something. But yeah, like, and even though I met like a lot of their like pillars of like honors or something, I don't know, whatever that was called. It's inconsequential now. My grades were not good enough to meet their education requirements, so I was not invited to be part of the National Honor Society. Why did this specific thing bother me so much? I don't really know in hindsight. I think if I had to like make an educated guess based on myself, it was probably that people were talking about it in front of me. They'd be having a whole conversation about what they were doing for it, what they were volunteering for because of it in front of me, without like including me in the conversation in any way. I'd be sitting there with like a few of my friends and they'd be like talking about this, and I'd just be like internal screaming. And I think in a lot of ways I was just bitter about it. My education history often came up as the barrier for me. I wanted to take AP Computer Sciences because of my history in math. Up until that point, they wouldn't let me take that course. However, I wouldn't have been in the math track I was in had my 8th grade teacher agreed to move me up into the upper level math class that I wanted to be in as a freshman. So like you can see where I was maybe starting to get very bitter about a lot of this stuff by the time I was a junior and could have been in National Honor Society. And you know, just like kind of aside from school, I also like very much began to think that I shouldn't bother trying to do things because I wasn't going to be good at them. I hadn't been good at them in the past, so why would I be good at them now? It gave me probably what was the start of my major imposter syndrome that I still struggle with all the time. It became, I shouldn't apply to that college, I'm not going to get in anyway. I shouldn't apply for that scholarship, I don't have good enough grades for it. And it just literally never ended. Honestly, I feel like this is kind of like the remedial kids version of when I hear gifted kids say like, if I'm not immediately good at something, I don't want to do it at all. I feel like because of the years of teachers treating me very negatively, not supporting me, even demeaning me, I had this idea that I was lesser, that I was not going to be good at things, I was not going to get better. That's something that I think was very, very pervasive in my entire life. Even now, even in my career, it's not gonna go away. All because I was tracked at a very young age as being dumber than other students. Obviously that wasn't how they put it, and I don't think that remedial students are dumber than the average students were. In their heads, they were just trying to help. They were trying to make sure that we got the help that we needed. But yeah, this gets a lot worse when you layer in my ADHD on top of it. Those of us with ADHD tend to already feel like we're not trying hard enough when we're trying 3, 4, 5 times as hard as like the average student, person, you know, what have you. This kind of thinking tends to be worse in those of us who are undiagnosed. And in my opinion, it tends to be worse in students who are tracked as remedial from a young age. I will say this always like felt a lot worse for me when it included gifted kids. Like adults would imply that remedial students were just lazy, that they weren't applying themselves, they weren't trying hard enough. And a lot of times it would be attached to this notion, which was like, unlike the gifted kids who are applying themselves, who are trying hard enough, who are doing well. And so just like even saying that out loud makes me feel real queasy, and it's like, who who would say that? It's like, well, to be honest, one of my high school teachers, but fuck you, Mr. Blouse. But that brings me kind of to my last point, which is bad gifted kid hot takes on the internet. Like I said, I'm going to try to be as nuanced as possible as I talk about this, because I know it's a very complex and very gray issue. It's not black and white at all. And again, this isn't to invalidate the experiences of people who were in the gifted programs and maybe have felt some detriment in their adult life because of that. However, I should say I sat down and wrote this entire script in a single sitting after I saw one really bad tweet. I'm obviously not going to show that specific tweet because that's not really the point of this video. This is more supposed to be about kind of giving a voice to remedial students and maybe reminding gifted students that they just... Well, I'll get into it. But anyway, so I'm not going to show any specific tweets. I'm not here to put anyone on blast. That's not what's going on. And they had made like a pretty normal, like, if you were a gifted kid, you're anxious now kind of tweet. And I guess people had responded negatively to it. And their way to follow that up was, those of you who are getting mad at my dumb tweet are just jealous that you weren't in a gifted program. And it's like, yeah, maybe. But also, I really need to point out to you, at least in my school, like this was the way it was for us. Gifted kids were often praised. They were often given better opportunities. They were also given more resources and better teachers, and they had more significantly engaging material to work with, and got to go on specific field trips, like got to go on special like gifted kid field trips that not everyone went on. Meanwhile, I wasn't allowed to go to recess if I did too poorly on my spelling test in 3rd grade. Yeah. What I'm trying to get at is, if you are someone who was formerly a gifted student, I guess it's kind of like, we need to talk. When you post things like that on the internet, I understand, like, you're free to post whatever you want on your personal Twitter. Like, I'm not judging anyone for that. What I'm trying to say is, dear gifted kids, when you make hot takes on the internet, if people respond negatively to them, pretty often, at least, you are the privileged few among your classmates. You have to understand that when people react negatively to tweets about the fact that you were a gifted kid, sometimes the people who are reacting negatively were struggling to keep their heads above water while their teachers tried to force them down. We were the kids that got called dumb while you went on a special field trip. And like, kind of going along with this is something that I've seen. I saw this in a tweet a really long time ago, but I have seen a lot of people who were in these gifted children's programs or gifted student programs speak about it as if implying that it was literally the worst thing that could have happened to a student. So I'm just gonna stop right here, and I'm going to gesture to the rest of this video and say that maybe there were things that were worse going on in your school. Just saying. And like, I hate to be that guy to tell you this, but if you were in a gifted program at your school, like, you just might have had privileges that other students didn't have. And when you make tweets like that, you just kind of look like an asshole to those of us who were treated very, very poorly by not only our fellow students, not only the kids in the gifted program, but often the adults in our lives. When you act like you had it worse than your peers in average or remedial courses, you're gonna get some negativity back. And you have the right to feel those feelings. And actually, I'm gonna steal what my editor, because we were talking about this literally earlier today. You have every right to feel those feelings, but you don't have a right to the sympathy of the people around you. And sometimes people just aren't going to be sympathetic to you about this sort of thing. And I don't think it's fair for students who were in a formerly gifted program to lash out in this way against people who maybe were in a remedial or not in the gifted program. Especially students who were in the remedial program. And like, I'm really not the person to be talking about this, in particular, this next subject, I mean. But like, this isn't even going into the fact that gifted student programs were very, very often, they were discriminatory towards people who were of marginalized groups. The gifted program at my elementary school, and often my middle school, and my high school was largely white. The thing about that is that my entire school was largely white. So I really don't have, I guess, the best recollection, but I know there are studies talking about how marginalized students were less likely to get into these gifted programs, especially if they were based upon teacher recommendations. This video got very long very fast, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of this topic. I might talk about it more in the future because I feel like I could really talk an entire video about my transition from being in a remedial program into like honors and AP courses and how that affected me in very specific ways, as opposed to like how my whole education career affected me. I guess let me know in the comments if you would like to see a video about that. I don't really know how to end this besides like giving every remedial student out there a lot of love. If you were in a remedial program, don't feel ashamed for it. It doesn't really mean anything for the rest of your life. And I'm gonna say this right now, if I have any young followers who are like in a remedial program currently, you're going to be okay. It's not going to have a major effect on the rest of your life. Eventually your grades just stop mattering. And like, it really sucks right now, but it will get better. And eventually you'll probably fall into something that works really, really well for you. And I really hope that for all of my followers, remedial students or gifted students. I know it could be like really, really difficult for remedial students to find passion in anything because we feel like we're so bad at everything. And I just want to say right now, like, if you're really passionate about something, please chase that. Yeah, also, I guess, like, I do want to say one thing at the end of this video. Did any of us actually learn how to study? Because, like, one thing that, like, I see former gifted kids talk about a lot is, like, this idea that they never learned study skills, but, like, I didn't learn study skills either. Like, I figured out how to study by watching Gilmore Girls. And, like, at some point it occurred to me that, like, oh hey, I could take notes in class with my hands and then type them up later and that would help me review. Because Rory does that in Gilmore Girls. So like, did any of us learn to study? Yeah, I would love to hear about this, just from anyone who was a general student in the world. Anyway, I think I'm gonna stop there. I feel like I need a drink, so that's where I'm at after this one. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this video, please like it. If you know, have anyone in your life that is a remedial student, please feel free to share this with them. I think it might be a really good opportunity to get the conversation going and get more remedial students to maybe talk about their experiences. The reason this essay wound up being very personal is I did try to do research about the effects of being in remedial tracking from a young age on students psychologically. And I don't know if it's just because I don't really have access to a lot of like the academic journals anymore like I did in college, but I really personally could not find a lot of research on this. There was a lot of research about whether or not remedial tracking was helpful to college students. I have not seen a lot of studies on this, so if you guys know any good academic sources on this, I would love to read them. Please send them to me. And also, I think like starting this conversation might be really good, considering that I feel like the gifted kids, they're doing a really good job of looking back on the way they were treated and how it affected them as they grew. And I think we need that for remedial students. And I think it's really important for us to kind of share our stories and talk about this. So if you have a short story to share, please hit me up. Please send me a message. I would love to do a follow-up video to this where I could hear from you guys as well. Unfortunately, I just don't really have a good way to ask. Like, right now, I've got a pretty small following on Twitter and Instagram and here on YouTube. But yeah, I'd love to hear more from you. Please feel free to reach out to me. If you are having a lot of psychological issues from this, please reach out to a therapist. I think that would be really good for you. My therapist was really helpful to me when I started kind of figuring a lot of this out. I talked a lot. I need a drink. Bye, guys. Josh. The remedial program in Josh. Into what I want to talk about next, which is... Oh no, don't do that. What is happening? However... Oh god, why? Drink water. Voice is going.